I now ask you to give a brief opening statement and then we'll proceed to discussions.
Thank you, Chair. So I worked for more than 30 years in the UK, commissioning and operating large nuclear power plants. In 1999, I moved to Australia, joined ANSTO, and was reactor manager for the commissioning and the early operation of the opal reactor. I'm now an associate professor at the ANU and their principal lecturer for reactors and the nuclear fuel cycle for their master's courses. I see 4 nuclear deployment opportunities for Australia. Large reactors, large power reactors, up to 1 gigawatt, and in my opinion, not more than that, in states with large grids, so Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. SMRs normally defined as less than 300 megawatts, practically anywhere. Micro-reactors up to 10 megawatts for off-grid communities and mines. Generation 4 advanced reactors to provide electricity and process heat to decarbonise industry. So Australia's not starting from scratch. We've got modern reactors that are safe. We've been safely managing the waste for 70 years. And nuclear is the only low emissions technology that's reliable and independent of the weather. I'm concerned that the GenCost report is not providing the government with the information they need to make long-term energy decisions. No one technology can give us reliable, affordable, low-emissions electricity. We need all of the above and determined investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Just one question on that. What size were the SMRs you spoke about, sorry, up to what megawatts?
So the international accepted definition is less than 300 megawatts electrical power. 300
megawatts, thank you. Excellent. Just a question around the large reactors and SMRs and micros, just as you've put in your statement there. Why do you say only 1 gigawatt for the large reactors?
So when you look at a power station unit connected to the grid system, you look at the amount of power in a single unit and the size of the grid system. And there's a sort of rule of thumb that a single unit shouldn't be more than 15% of the grid system. So one gigawatt works in the larger systems like Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. And what would the time frame be to produce a large reactor up to 1 gigawatt, considering the legislation required at a state and territory level, safety and environmental framework required, community engagement and consultation, construction period? What would be the expected timeline to see us using power from a nuclear power station of 1 gigawatt in this country?
Right, so there's really 2 parts to the timeline. There's all the preparation part, and then there's the construction part up to power. So the construction technically starts when you put in the first reactor concrete. And then you go through the construction process until you connect to the grid, and that's the construction and power part of it. So for a large reactor, we would expect that to now be less than 5 years, providing it was a proven design, it wasn't first of a kind. We choose just one design for the country, so we don't do multiple designs. We've got a vendor with a good supply chain, and importantly, we train the operators during the construction process, so that as soon as the construction's finished and the operations license is issued, they can start up the reactor. So this is the only thing that the UAE got wrong. They constructed in 6 years, but then they had a 2-year delay because their operators weren't trained and ready. So the regulator wouldn't give them the operations license. If it hadn't been for that, they would have been 2 years earlier. Now, before that, you've got the preparations. So we would prepare to the IAA milestones program. So you look at that, and there's 19 infrastructure items that you've got to go through. We tick the boxes on most of those. We set up an implementing organisation. We do a community consultation. Then you do a site licence application. So for that, you do have to do an environmental impact statement, and then you get the siting licence, and then you have to go through the process of getting a construction licence. The big advantage for us is we've got a world-class regulator already. And for a proven design, it would have been licensed somewhere else in the world. And our PANSA can then collaborate with, say, the NRC or the ONR in the UK, and that speeds up the licensing process.
And so how long would that part of the process be, Mr. Irwin?
So that's, say, 6 years. So you can do it in less than 10 years if you want to. The opal reactor, we went from initial announcement to full power in less than 9 years. That was an Australian project, and that was very much a first of a kind and a very complicated research reactor. So we can do it if we organise and want to.
Would you say the consultation period and social licence for a medical grade nuclear facility, which is doing amazing work, would be very different to a nuclear power station? Around 7 of them around our beautiful country?
So for opal, it was an existing research reactor site. So it was a replacement for the existing reactor. So it was a lot easier to get the agreement for that reactor. For a power reactor on one of the sites that the coalition's identified, you've got to go through a process of letting the local community ask questions and get reassurance that it's safe and there will be benefits to the community. And that's not a quick process. So I note that in the coalition's plan, they've got 2.5 years for that. So you've got to go through a process where you talk to the community, allow them to ask questions. Australians don't like being told what to do. They like to make their minds up about things. So you've got to give them the opportunity to ask questions, think about it, and then go back again and let them ask more questions until they're satisfied.
And the Lucas Heights facility, how many hectares is that facility on?
I can't remember.
Okay, that's all right. You could take that on notice, that's okay.
I could take that on notice.
Yep. And then maybe a follow-up that you might have to take on notice too is how many hectares would be required to have a 1 gigawatt large reactor? For instance, at Liddell, as is being proposed.
Yes. So Liddell site is 100 hectares, and a large reactor would be less than 20 hectares. So it'd fit in a corner of Liddell. A large power reactor would fit on any coal-fired power station site. SMRs, even smaller, down to about 12 hectares, again, fit on any coal-fired site.
And Mr. Irwin, does that include the exclusion zone required to be around a nuclear power station?
Well, the exclusion zone depends on the regulator's assessment of the safety of the reactor. So for the SMRs they're looking at the moment, say for that's the first one that was licensed in the US, the NuScale reactor, they determined the exclusion zone, the emergency planning zone, was at the site boundary. Now for big US power reactors, traditionally, it was 10 miles. Because of the safety of modern reactors, it's come down to the site boundary.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Before I hand over to the Deputy Chair, just one final question. One of the big barriers here to getting a large reactor, 1 gigawatt reactor, and an SMR or even a micro reactor is the fact that there is bans in every state and territory on this. How would you get around that? And how long would that take?
So that's the question of policy, which is outside the scope of mine.
So would you say
knowledge.
policy is one of the biggest time constraints and barriers to getting nuclear technology into this country, nuclear power stations?
I wouldn't like to comment on that. All I'd say is that my understanding is that the Commonwealth have powers. They certainly use them in the low-level waste repository because the Waste Management Act that they put in place get them powers over South Australia to install that waste management facility. So I understand that the Commonwealth has powers that they can use.
And that facility didn't actually go ahead, did it?
No, in spite of local support, it didn't go ahead.
Okay, no worries. Thank you, Mr Irwin. Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Irwin, thank you. Your remarks at the beginning, so you personally commissioned nuclear power plants in the UK, is that right?
Yes, I commissioned 8 of them.
8?
It was an exciting time in the UK as we went through a big nuclear power programme.
And you helped commission and operate our reactor in Australia, the Opal, is that right?
Yes. So I joined ANSTO when I came from Australia. Initially, I was in Government of Public Affairs, advising the government. I was in charge of fuel. I was project manager for the spent fuel shipments to France. And then when Opal got its licence to construct, because I think of all my commissioning experience, I was appointed as commissioning reactor manager and then the first reactor manager for Opal. Well,
Mr Irwin, it's an honour to have you giving evidence, given that background. I dare say from everyone we've spoken to date, you probably have more hands-on experience in the nuclear energy industry, both overseas but also with our own reactor. So just going then to the Opal reactor that we have ourselves at Lucas Heights, you talked before about the speed at which we were able to build that. Can you just confirm, with that reactor, was that built on time and on budget?
Yes, very much so. So it was an Argentinian designed reactor. So part of the reactor was supplied by Argentina, but most of the work was Australian content. So my understanding, remember, is about 70% was Australian content. So John Hollands did the civil work, Evans Deacons did the electrical work. So there was a lot of Australian industries involved in that whole effort. But I think importantly, we appointed the operations staff early in the construction, trained them, and then they were ready and authorised. As soon as the construction was finished, we started into the startup because we got an operations licence straight away.
Thank you. It's probably something not spoken about as much as it should be in Australia to celebrate such success, and with a lot of people who like to complain about whether or not nuclear reactors can be built on time and on budget. You've just reminded us, well, Australia's already done just that. I can imagine people might say, well, we're talking there about a smaller sort of a reactor. Can you provide some commentary on the relative complexity, if you like, how complex it is if you're looking at the Opal reactor, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought was a first-of-a-kind research reactor, compared to what the coalition policy is, only a next-of-a-kind nuclear power plant. Can you give some commentary sort of comparing those two, please?
Yeah. So the Opal reactor is 20 megawatts thermal. A large nuclear power plant, if we went to a large one, would be up to 3,000 megawatts thermal. So the large one is physically much larger. The Opal is very complex because what you want to do with that reactor is just generate neutrons. You don't want any heat. So you generate neutrons, then you use them to produce medical isotopes. We use them for silicon irradiation for the semiconductor industry and produce neutrons for neutron beam instruments. So they look at things like battery life and recharging with all the neutron spectrums, etc. So it's complex because you're putting things in and out of it all the while. A nuclear power plant is just a steam generator. So the most popular nuclear power plant in the world is a pressurized water reactor. Over 80% of reactors operating now are pressurized water reactors. Most of the ones under construction are pressurized water reactors. So all it simply does is heat water, produce steam, which goes to a turbine, which is exactly the same as the back end of a coal-fired power station. So you've got turbines, pumps, compressors, condenser. That's all the same sort of technology. So in that way, it's a lot simpler, but it's just bigger.
Right. So am I also right in saying that Opal was a first of a kind?
Yes, so there's very few research reactors worldwide. Argentina had built one in Egypt, which was somewhat similar, but Opal is unique and certainly a first of a kind. Whereas whatever we build in Australia must not be first of a kind. It must be a proven design. We don't want to spend time on finishing the design during construction.
And then, so you've spoken there about the next of a kind, which confirms the coalition policy. The timeline you laid out, incidentally, also confirms coalition policy, as well as advice we've received from most other witnesses and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Maybe a broader question which allows us to think through other aspects of the coalition policy. Given your experience commissioning nuclear power plants overseas, as well as the Opal in Australia, what are the key lessons learnt that we should learn here in Australia before embarking on a civil nuclear program?
So I think there's very good guidance from the IAEA in the milestones program. So you look at that and it tells you all the various issues. There's 19 infrastructure issues. So you've got to make sure you're ticked off on all of those. As in the UAE decision, what they did is look at all the designs worldwide and look for a vendor that could build to time, that was a proven design. So they chose the South Korean TEPCO. It's very important that the reactor is as simple as possible. So, for instance, we would not build an Hinkley Point C, an EPR in Australia. It's far too big. It's 1750 megawatts. It's very, very complex. I commissioned Hinkley B, which is the AGR, and it's sitting next to it. It's just too big. The same ones in Finland, the same ones in Flamanville. So we rule out that sort of reactor. We want something that's as simple as possible, not more than, say, 1,000 megawatts. So there are choices worldwide in that sort of range.
And other aspects, for example, that are part of our plan, just get feedback on. So coalitions concluded that when it comes to SMRs and then when it comes to the modern larger plants, Australia should ultimately choose one type rather than multiple types so that we can build capability and also slide down the learning curve. I've spoken also about having more than one unit plants, again, to have that cluster effect and economies effect. Can you just provide any feedback on some of those assumptions we've made as part of our policy?
Absolutely right to build a fleet. And that's the big thing we got wrong in the UK. Everyone was different because we thought by having competition between the vendors, we get a better result, but you don't. You get the best result by choosing a design. This is what the French did. They built a whole fleet. They were commissioning a reactor every 3 months in the 1980s. And they built their whole fleet, all of them the same. So you've got to choose the right design. So this is why you've got this implementing organisation, a technical group which looks at the best designs worldwide and chooses the best design, and then you stick with that design.
And that the group that we're looking at, for example, is an independent nuclear energy coordinating authority, which we've designed that part of our policy based on the IAEA's milestone approach. We envisage that organisation doing the heavy lifting in that regard. Is that consistent with what you're recommending here, or is it something a bit different?
No, that's absolutely. The IAEA usually calls an implementing organisation, but it's exactly the same. And you'll get tremendous support from the IAEA for the whole process. They will help you all the way. They did in the UAE. They provided tremendous support to the UAE. They're always welcome to see newcomer countries, and they'll give assistance. Even during opal construction, they came and did reviews. I was reviewed on operations practices before we even started up the opal reactor. They came and looked at what we proposed and said, yes, what you're proposing is international best practice. Therefore, you get a tick for it. And they do the same for our nuclear power program.
And I think it's my last question. And so maybe I'll finish with a very high-level question, but you can take it any which way you like. But given your experience and your background internationally, with all the debate about whether Australia has what it takes to do this, do you believe Australia can do this?
Yeah, we demonstrated it with opal. I've looked around industries in Australia, and there's a lot of very clever people, a lot of very good industries. I think given the opportunity, and what we're seeing now with AUKUS, is this big upskilling at the ANU. We're doing extra courses. I was lecturing to government departments last week. We did a short course on reactors and fuel cycle. So there's a lot of upskilling going. AUKUS is driving part of that. It would fit really well into the nuclear power program as well.
It's an honour to have your evidence as part of this committee process. So thank you very much, Mr. Irwin.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Mr. Burnell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Irwin, for presenting today and providing your evidence. I was going to ask questions, slipped my mind. I'll move to something else. So, the coalition policy resembles things you've called for years, including the construction of nuclear power on coal-fired power stations or station sites. Were you consulted by the Deputy Chair and the opposition in drafting the nuclear policy?
No, we've never done any work directly for the coalition, but we did produce a paper. So there's an SMR nuclear paper, just transition to low emissions technology, repowering coal-fired power stations in Australia. We've done several editions of this. The latest update is this year. And a lot of people have looked at that and used this as a reference. So I can table that for the committee for now.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. If you could please table that into the Secretariat, that would be great.
I remember where I wanted to go initially. In your expert opinion, which type of reactor should be under consideration?
Well, as I said, you've got a choice of starting with a large one or an SMR. And this is the job of the implementing committee, to look at what's available worldwide, what's a proven design, what's best for the sites that you've got in mind.
I suppose I'm trying to get my head around some of these forgive me, this is all new to me, not something that I've ever researched, but like the different types that I'm aware of: heavy water reactors, light water reactors, gas-cooled fast reactors, very high temperature reactors, molten salt, sodium-cooled, lead-cooled fast reactors. Like, which is the type that you go with? It's a bit confusing, all these different types of reactors, right, and what makes them uniquely different.
Right. So, as I said, the most common reactor worldwide is a pressurised water reactor. So this is a light water reactor. Over 80% of the current fleet are PWRs. Most of the reactors under construction are PWRs. It's even in the nuclear power submarine. That's a PWR as well. So their big advantage is regulators know all about PWRs. They're very good with PWRs because they're used to licensing. So the whole licensing process tends to be quicker. So you'd think that's probably a good place to start.
So is that like a Gen 1, 2, 3, 4? Like...
This is 3+, it's
right.
called. So it's the existing generation, but with all the safety features, all the latest safety features in it. So it would have survived even a Fukushima type accident.
Right. So with the SMR side of the equation, the thing that I keep struggling with is we've seen a number fail across the globe. There's potentially 2 that may be working, but no one can really give me specifics on how well. Like, are we really in a position to go all in on an SMR and just hope that we can do what no other country essentially has been able to achieve effectively?
No,
right.
we don't go in on something that's not proven. The existing ones, the Russians have used small PWRs to power icebreakers for many years, so they thought it's a good idea to put 2 on a barge and have floating nuclear power. And it's supplying the most northern city in Russia, in Kevin. So it provides heat, and heat's essential up there because it's minus 20 degrees, and it provides electricity to the community and mines. It's working very well. So it's, you know, we wouldn't buy one, but it's a good example of a technology that's working. And then the one in China is a high temperature gas reactor, which is the generation 4 reactor that was built. China, of course, you know, are building a huge number of power reactors. But this is a Gen 4 for the small reactor that they built. And again, that's been operating since 2022, very successfully. So that's, you know, that's good to keep an eye on as well.
So, if we're talking about time to deliver as urgently as we possibly can, 11-year time frame, keep hearing today, I assume SMRs will not be the pathway best taken.
Well, we're going to see very shortly because in Canada, Ontario Power Generation, Darlington site are about to get a construction licence for the GE Hitachi BWRX-300 SMR, and we'll see how successful that is.
Sorry, can you just say that again? Sorry, the type.
So it's GE Hitachi, who are the boiling water reactor vendors. They've been making them for 60 years. They've got a small version called their BWRX-300, 300 megawatts electrical output. It's going to an existing site at Darlington in Ontario. It's about to get its construction license. So we'll be able to see shortly if that's a successful sort of design. If it is, it could be an option because it's a light water reactor. It's easier to license, etc. So we're following that one closely.
And so is that a first of a kind?
It's the first of a kind. It's the first BWRX 300, but it's based on their ESBW existing licensed bigger reactor. So it's a small version of that. It uses a lot of the same technology. That's why the licensing is relatively quick for that sort of reactor.
Didn't you say just earlier, though, that first of a kind is not the optimal pathway for us to take?
No, so we're not really first of a kind. We're letting Ontario be first of a kind, demonstrate it, look at it, see if it's suitable for us.
We'd be second.
And then, we follow. We want to be a fast follower.
Okay.
We don't want to be first, we want to be a fast follower. We want to remove the ban and get preparing now. Get the implementing organisation, start looking worldwide.
I've been given the wrap up. I've just got one last question. Just on being consulted about policy question, can I confirm that you participated in Peter Dutton's meeting with collie leaders 2 weeks ago?
Yes, quite by accident actually. We were down at Collie doing an information meeting for the local community, and we'd arranged to meet the Shire Council the next morning. And we're actually surprised when Peter Dutton turned up there. It wasn't organised like that, but it was very useful because they got to question him directly, but we were also there so they could ask technical questions. So they asked Dutton all the policy questions, and we answered all the technical questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Irwin. Maybe you need to think about resetting your devices at night. Maybe someone's watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennell. Mr. Perrott.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your evidence, Mr. Irwin. And just going to Mr. Bennell's question in terms of collie, I think your evidence earlier was that any single unit shouldn't be more than 50% of the grid. Would that mean that collie as a site wouldn't meet that criteria?
No, because Collie's been identified as a site for an SMR, so it would be a 300 megawatt maximum SMR on that site. So you're looking at the size of the Swiss. That's from memory about 2,500 megawatts on that. So an SMR fits easily into the Swiss. But you couldn't take a very large reactor.
Okay. And similarly, South Australia?
So South Australia, again, is a very small grid, 2,000 megawatts grid.
Okay.
You wouldn't put a large reactor on that grid. You'd be looking for a small reactor again.
And I'm just going to channel some of the enthusiasm of the Deputy Chair for your expertise. And just wanted to get a bit of that snapshot. You commissioned 8 plants in the UK. Were they all advanced gas cooled?
Well, the first one I did was at the last of nearly the last of the Magnox plants, and then the rest of them were advanced gas cooled reactors.
Okay. So UK has been plugged into the nuclear grid for 68 years. I think at one stage it was as high as 26% of the market, now down to 16%. What is our electricity market like the UK, or are we different?
No, what happened in the UK was they found gas in the North Sea. So there was this huge dash for gas, and there was all the cheap gas. So competition in the market got really bad for nuclear. So they built the first of the pressurised water reactors, Sizewell B, and then they'd intended to build a whole fleet of them, but because of the gas, they didn't. So we ended up just having Sizewell. And we relied on gas in the UK. The gas is now running out. We're having to import it. You know, they're in a bit of a strike.
I see that Scotland still says no to any new nuclear. Is that because of they want gas royalties, or because they're fundamentally opposed to nuclear? What's the story there?
Yeah, Scotland's always different. They go their own way, and you know they believe in offshore wind, but of course it's not always there. So there's two nuclear power plants in Scotland, Hunterston and Torness. Torness was the sister station for Heysham that I commissioned. So I know Torness.
So in terms of the grid, is Capital saying offshore wind is just so cheap, we can't compete with nuclear can't compete with offshore wind?
No, it mainly couldn't compete with gas. That's what stopped the construction program.
Gas is running out now. They're paying, and
yes.
Gas.
So they started building nuclear again, and this is why they're building Hinkley C, and then there'll be Sizewell C will be the next one after that, and then they're looking at the Rolls-Royce small modular reactors, etc. as well. So they're getting back into nuclear slowly.
Oh, sorry, I must have different advice. I thought Scotland still said no to nuclear. I thought we were building in Somerset. So
yeah. Scotland's still saying no to nuclear. Yeah.
Because of wind, or
because of offshore wind mainly, I think.
Okay, so in terms of a straight capital decision, capital is flowing to renewables up against nuclear.
Well, it's flowing to nuclear in England, and in Scotland it's flowing to wind.
Yeah. Any comment on the cost blowout for the Somerset location? What's been the problem?
It's a very big, very complex reactor. So it gets its safety by having a 4-train safety system. It's extremely complex. It would be far too big for Australia. It's not one that you would consider at all. I mean, once you've built it, it's beautiful. You know, the Finland one is completed and operating. It's supplying a large percentage of the Finland grid system now, and it's caused a drop in prices. But you know, it's not the sort of thing we would go for in Australia.
So Australia, I'm speaking to you from Queensland, which looking a bit sunny at the moment. I mean, my understanding is, you know, we've got suburbs in Brisbane that are bigger than the United Kingdom. We seem to have a lot of space that would benefit from having solar panels. Back when UK plugged into nuclear in 1956, there was no wind, apart from a couple of Dutch windmills, and no solar. So it would seem to be that we've got a natural advantage like the Scottish in terms of wind and solar that means that nuclear would not stack up obviously the best time to start nuclear was 68 years ago, not in 16 years' time, surely.
Yeah, but the second best time is now, so we ought to get on with it. I mean, I'm in Queensland at the moment. This is why I apologise for not being able to be in the Parliament, because I got this notification. I'm actually in far north Queensland on holiday at the moment.
Good on you.
I apologise for the attire.
Anyone that's staying in Queensland is okay by me, Mr. Irwin.
But the big problem with wind I've found in Queensland is the devastating the Great Dividing Range. I think the environmental impacts of wind up here are really devastating. And I'm very surprised that people aren't more concerned about this. You look at the Great Dividing Range, it's absolutely devastating. And they can continue to build. So I'm really surprised at what they're doing to Queensland.
A lot of tourists turn up to the most beautiful part of the world, Mr. Irwin.
The Great Dividing Range is being devastated.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
All right. Thanks very much for your evidence, Mr. Irwin. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. I just got one final question, Mr. Irwin. Do you know what the opposition has proposed for the Gen 4 reactors that they have said? Do you know what reactors they are?
As far as I know, they haven't proposed any Gen 4 reactors. Australia, via ANSTO, is a member of the Gen 4 International Forum. We're looking particularly at two types of Gen 4 reactors, which will be useful for process heats and electricity supply in the future. That's the molten salt reactor and the very high temperature reactor that's operating in China. So Gen 4 is a bit further down the road. It's one that we're monitoring. Could be really useful for decarbonising process heating industry.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Irwin.